Zane, welcome. It's so lovely to have all of you with us this evening.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for, hosting the space and inviting us to come here. Asheville is one of my favorite towns. I used to go there every year. My mom would take me down and I get to see Firestorm, see Malaprops, and just be in the space. So I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
So I want to introduce everyone a little bit about the work and then the history of this book. It's something we have all been working on since about 2018 now. So it has a really long history and a pretty messy one, just as the best kind of like queer history of a book, right? And it started out as this like queer Appalachia community project along with their Instagram page, but then also I had my own zine attached to it. And we sort of all met in that space and really created a community out of it. And we were so empowered by the work that they had done that we finally felt like we could voice our own kind of queerness and our own identities. So it's something very dear to me, something, I'm from West Virginia, something really personal to me. And I appreciate you all holding space with us tonight. So I'm hoping all of you, Beck, Matt, Kendall, can introduce yourselves. Beck, do you want to start?
Hi, I'm Beck Banks. I'm in my final month of my PhD program at the University of Oregon. Thank you. So excited about that. So I'm media communication at the school, and I've been specializing in transgender rurality and also in transgender audience reception. So between those, I ended up, when I was starting to form really what I wanted to do with my dissertation, my work, I stumbled across Queer Appalachia, an Instagram group, and I was just like, this is amazing. As Zane was saying earlier, it really helped me articulate some things about my identity, having come from East Tennessee, being a queer person. And then I started seeing so many other things come out of it. And then I was just like, this is a great area of study. I'm going to look in particular at trans media producers in Central Appalachia. And I did my dissertation on it, did field work. Because some of these people are online, I was able to do things from distance, and at one point started working with the project Queer Appalachia on some chapters for this. And again, messy history on some of this. Had a fantastic time working with Zane and the community project that came out of this and sorting through it. So happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Beck. Matthew, introduce yourself.
Yes, of course. And by the way, happy birthday, Zane.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my birthday. Yeah. It's my birthday book talk, so I appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew Ryan Sparks. I guess I could start off by saying I'm an Appalachian without borders, specifically a Southeastern Kentuckian. I was raised in Owsley County in Booneville till I was 5. Then I moved to Leslie County, where my parents are from, and I was raised between there and Perry and Buckhorn and Clay a bit. So I'm also, like Beck, in the final months of my dissertation at Ben Gurion University of the Negev in Israel. I'm an anthropologist. I mostly work with extremely marginalized religious and cultural groups in the Middle East, specifically the Sinai Bedouin and the Negev Bedouin. And that was kind of how I got started, but because I guess I was always afraid to anthropologize myself as an Appalachian, because that's what I should have done a long time ago, but I thought it was so colonial and, outside. But like Beck said, when I found Queer Appalachia, I felt like I'd come home. And, people were always pegging me as living in DC, as being in the country. People thought I was too urban or whatever because I was queer. In the city, they thought I was too rural. So it was just kind of a mess. And throughout this process, I really began to kind of discover my identity and, how my work kind of can inform that, and building this community that I think has been very helpful to a lot of people, including all of us. And I guess I got started with Marks in the Mountains back when my cousin, who was working as a lawyer in South Dakota, sent me. She's also originally from Southeastern Kentucky as well. But she sent me this link to the Marks in the Mountains, and she's like, Matt, you should apply for this. So I reached out to Zane, and the rest is history, I guess you could say. It's not really been very clean cut, but it's been fun. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here and very happy to participate in this discussion and share my chapter with you all.
Yeah, I think the funnest thing about having all of us in conversation is that we've all become really good friends throughout this process. A lot of us have organized together, we've collaborated together on projects, and a lot of that is a testament to the Queer Appalachia Project. Not only did it help me find, a queer home for me in West Virginia, which I had tried to escape my whole life, but then it also connected me with, all y'all and the rest of the Queer Appalachia world, which is really powerful for us. Kendall, can you introduce yourself?
Well, I can certainly try. No. My name is Kendall. I am not a few months from finishing my dissertation, and I'm trying not to panic about it. No, I'm a year into writing, so I've got one more year left, and my dissertation, tentatively titled "Radical Folk: Embodying the Revolutionary in Appalachian Performance," is my current project and what I spend most of my time doing. But I am first and foremost a dancer, a dance maker, a creator, and that's sort of like my jumping off point for pretty much everything. And then this sort of academic thing that I've fallen into, this PhD, critical dance studies, it sort of is like a mysterious project of figuring out what the academy is and what academic work does. So I always approach it like with my own body first. As far as the history with this project, like everyone has stated, it's been a little bit of a nebulous sort of whirl of excess and super queer in that respect, I think. But I had seen that Zane had posted on Marks in the Mountains, and I just started following them on Instagram. I was like, what's this cool thing? And, sort of started following, and they sent me a message and like, hey, you should like submit like something like you're like queer dance stuff. What's going on? What do you write about? Like submit an abstract. And I was like, so my department has a really strict policy of like nothing before your ABD, because they just don't want you to look like dumb. Do you know what I mean? Like for that to like haunt you later in your career. And I was like, I'm also a little busy. Maybe I shouldn't. Absolutely. Let me send you an abstract. So, and I guess we ended up here with this beautiful collection, getting to hang out together and, chat with each other and you all. So, yeah, I guess that's all for now.
When people ask me what this book is about, it's very hard to pin it down, right? And Matt was actually the one who wrote the back, because I couldn't figure out what to say about it. I've been so close to this book and all of you and the thinking about what Queer Appalachia even is and what it means to me, that I was just so close to, I couldn't even figure out what this book was anymore. What was so inspiring for a lot of us was not only being able to articulate queerness in a non-metronormative way, but then also find queer narratives and queer stories and representations and narrative and archiving in the Electric Dirt collection that Queer Appalachia had done, which was a zine project, right? And so when I think what this book is in conversation with, it's, for me, a lot of it is Electric Dirt, and a continuation of thinking through our identity and our positionality, but then also how entangled that is with our own studies and critical theory, and trying to make it as accessible and interesting to read and narrative based as we can, and really conscious of archiving our voices, as people who have really had our voices marginalized and eclipsed historically. It's been really exciting to see the rebirth or the greater interest in Queer Appalachia, right? Because when we started this collection, there was maybe one or two books that Mary Gray had done on rural queerness, right? Queering the countryside. But Appalachia was going through the whole scapegoat of the Trump election still from 2016. And, having all these stereotypes of being backwards and being devoid of queer spaces. And so not only was it in response to that, but also very conscious of wanting to say, not only are we here, but that for me, my queerness is completely interconnected with my background and being from West Virginia. I can't understand or articulate my queerness without that. And so I'm interested how you all understand sort of what Queer Appalachia means to you, and how maybe you interrogated it in your chapters.
I think I'm going to say I had similar experience. Matthew was saying what I'm hearing here across the board. Then when I saw that, I realized, hey, this is going to be a part of my work, that project originally. And also, why can't I bring myself fully to the table? I think it's something that takes a long time as a queer person to realize can be a part of your work. I can talk about Appalachia, even though I'm not living there anymore. Like all the ways you can just place yourself. I felt like I was able to find a place in my new spot to be able to explore. There was another element to that question I was really into. I'm sorry, I'm so spacey today. I say, like, what is queer Appalachia to me? How do I find that in my book? I know, I'm back there. See that? So yeah, so I actually, for my comprehensive exams, my advisor, Julie Newton, and a person on my committee who will be at the new school this incoming year, Cassius Adair, they designed a question for me that was to put Appalachian studies in conversation with transgender studies. And that is what that's basically what that chapter is that I wrote, was the response that I sat down and typed out in a room for 4 hours after 6 months of studying this stuff. And I've actually just continued to write in that area and expand on it. And that's kind of the basis of a lot of, along with talking to the transmedia producers of my dissertation, that hopefully that will be a book that will be added. And with the y'all means y'all of queer Appalachian studies.
Okay, I guess I'll say, sorry, if it's okay. Do you have, is there another question, Zane, or we all answer? Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean, I would say for me, again, I don't want to just, repeat the same things everyone is saying, but yeah, I found it really hard to separate my queerness and being Appalachian. It's always set me apart, but it's always, when I think about queer Appalachian, and growing up especially, I think of like the person who was in the church choir or the church, Pentecostal band, channeling all of this wild performativity into a performance, or, the people who just, embrace this kind of like dirt queer aesthetic, as it's been mentioned. Growing up, I mean, in so many different ways, I was just completely surrounded by it, especially in southeastern Kentucky. And you're always, I think, when it's hard, it's so difficult to see from when you are, when we as a collective, as a group, are being so queered by the broader space of America. It's a bit harder to think like, sorry, I'm a bit spacey today too. Yeah, it's a bit harder to conceive of yourself as being so like that. It's hard to like look at the outside, and I think that the queer studies particularly has been a way of examining how Appalachia is perceived, because it's such an isolated community, it's such an isolated culture in a lot of ways, that a lot of times our limit of vision is kind of bound by those mountains in a lot of ways. And so I think queer studies really helped me to kind of understand my innate queerness in Appalachia. I didn't really add much to the conversation with that, but I think that growing up, I was definitely surrounded by it in so many different ways.
Yeah, I think what's so powerful about queer studies, and obviously queer studies and critical theory, it really drives this collection, right? Because I'll at least for me, when Queer Appalachia was coming out with their electric dirt scene, I was actually in Budapest, Hungary doing my master's, and I was in political science, but I really got pushed into gender studies because they didn't see the work that I was doing as real political science. So I was thinking through how power operates, and what queer theory really does is it shows that the things we separate from each other aren't actually separate. Right. And as a queer Appalachian, that really resonated to me because I have felt like I never had the privilege to not sit at the intersections of multiple axes of oppression and an identity. Right. And so I feel like that, Matt and I've talked a lot about this because we worked together on an editing activist company for a while of what queer organizing and Appalachian organizing can look like. What about you, Kendall? What do you think?
Beck, Matthew, thank you for that. It's like, I just want to like jump in with like wild conversation. Like we're just like hanging out. Do you know what I mean? So I'll keep on topic. So I think similarly to Beck, I was doing my qualifying exams. And we have, in my program in dance studies, we have 4 different lists that we read with 4 different professors, and each one is sort of thematic. So I remember one list was like political and critical theory with a heavy dose of like necro and biopolitics. One was just a strictly Appalachian studies list with Dr. Jessica Wilkerson, who you may be familiar with. Another was a sort of methods, so like oral histories, ethnography. And then the 4th one was Black feminist epistemology with a heavy focus on queer studies. So all of like my dissertation itself sort of became very shaped by that, or as it's growing is heavily shaped by those bodies of work, and this chapter is it's seasoned with those things, but it hasn't been yet in-depth evaluated, after 100+ texts, reading intensely. I will say, so I think for me, finding my sort of own queer Appalachianness, like it felt like it's been a journey. And as finding one's identity is, I think I never identified as Appalachian. And I feel like I've never like properly lived within the region, but I was quite close with my grandmother, who is like, if there was someone who could not be more Appalachian, like it was her. And I feel like I learned a lot of things in how to exist in the world because of that. So I think in the beginning of my chapter, I'm like, hey, look, it's not a geographic thing for me. It's more like my hill cred is like pretty high because of the skills and the knowledges that I have that I learned from my grandmother and through that kind of ancestral, passing down of information. But I also found so my when I started my PhD, I was studying like electric powwow music and like radical indigenous studies, was kind of where my work was. And for a lot of reasons that sort of evolved and changed. But one of those reasons was I found myself in a position of being very defensive in seminar and feeling like I had to, what do I want to say, like be defensive of these people that were basically talking shit about, the hillbillies and the rednecks and the white trash, from Appalachia. And I felt very defensive about that. And I was like, whoa, this is some meaty territory. And I think I would like to spend more time here. And how, that sort of the stereotypes, but then how you don't read as those stereotypes. So people feel like they can say things around you that, they wouldn't necessarily say in everyone's company. But I found myself on the defensive and wanted to really articulate and put some work behind that, through looking at bodies and what bodies are doing, what bodies are telling us, and how these embodied practices are theorizing. It just doesn't look like what maybe an academic circle would see as theorizing.
I think what I've noticed in all of the chapters, at least most of them in the collection, is a lot of us have been and have internalized a lot of shame, right, about queerness or about Appalachianness. And so it was a very healing project, I think, for a lot of us to find power in our bodies and then power in the places that we call home, right? And use that as saying there is value in that and it does inform the work we do. And that's not bad. That actually is a testament to and what academia should have, right? At the same time, and so in that way, it's very personal, a lot of like very narrative based intersecting with theory and how we understand ourselves and really defending, right, queer Appalachianness as a method and as a way of existing, as a political project. Despite that, academia and academics have a history of being very extractive towards marginalized populations, including Appalachia, right? And we talk a lot about how media and historic like sociology and sociologists ended up using Appalachia as sort of a stereotyped region, right? Or even beyond that, the way that there's a lot of distrust that marginalized people have of academics and academia, that there's this feeling that people come in, study you, and then leave, and it's very extractive and exploitative in that way. And one of the things we have that has come out since we published this book is that people were really excited the idea of the book, and then they were surprised that we were engaged so much with critical theory, even though we were very conscious of trying to make it as accessible as possible, right? And so I'm interested if you all can talk a little bit about how, you know, we all are on the outskirts or inside of academia, how what that says about our own queer Appalachian identities, how that informed our chapters, and how do you think that there is potential for academic work to create positive change? Is it inherently exploitative? How do we kind of circumvent this distrust in our spaces?
I don't mind like leading the way on this one. So just to like go back to what you were originally saying, I wouldn't say that I was never, I mean, you know, growing up, but like my childhood was like many of y'all can imagine. I mean, you know, it was like in some of the poorest parts of the country, but it was pretty fabulous. You know, I mean, I was raised with my grandparents. I had to spend a ton of time outdoors around all these wild animals, you know, that I never took for granted. But growing up, you know, I just thought like, you know, I hate it here. Like this place is so boring. It's too traditional. It's too conservative. Like I got to get out. I got to find my place elsewhere and leave. And I read this quote from Irving Cobb the other day, and basically he said something like, to be born in Kentucky as a heritage, to brag about it as a habit, but to oh yeah, my full shirt is Haints, Witches and Boogers. We said keeping it casual. Polk Salad Festival 2020. So it's yeah, it's thank you. Yeah, it's we're keeping it casual with this. So basically, yeah, I started to appreciate and the storytelling, especially, which is what mine is about. I loved it, and later on, when there was kind of a click moment when I realized, holy crap, like you were like literally born as an oral historian, and but yeah, so to be anyway, Irving Cobb to appreciate it as a virtue, and I think that same thing could be said about all of Appalachia. I think, fortunately, at least in my own experience as an anthropologist, I think that the field is slowly becoming less extractive, at least as I can see in certain areas. I think it's, I was talking to my advisor the other day, and she was basically mentioning to me, you know, although it was used as a tool of, you know, colonialism and extraction, it's now being decolonized, post-colonized, recolonized, as you would say. And I definitely do see these trends happening, at least in the field of Middle East studies in my work. I think there's a lot of overlaps with Appalachia. So I do see that there, well, I see one great thing that I'm seeing is I feel that a lot of the stereotypes seem to be becoming undone slowly. And I'm talking, this happened super recently. I mean, like in maybe the past, I would say I really started noticing in the past like year and a half. And I think there's always going to be some of these persisting stereotypes. What I do wonder though is, here's my always fear with the, I feel like every few years there's a big boom of interest in Appalachia and everyone gets real excited and there's all this great work being done, and then it just kind of like fizzles out. I'm hoping that this doesn't fizzle out. That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that we can breathe enough life into it that we can actually begin to think about these things in some new ways that aren't just because it's a fad, and you know, it will actually do some long-lasting positive change in the region. I think that's my 2 cents.
Hi. Really interesting stuff there. So much that can be chewed on too in this particular area. So a lot of what I've looked at is like, I'm so scared of repeating the tradition of extracting from Appalachia, especially now that I don't live there. Like I continue to question like my insider outsider status, that kind of deal. When I did my field work and when I work with other people, I always try to take this covenantal approach, which is clearly you're giving me something. As a researcher, that's happening, so I need to give you something back. Which is part of the reason I was working with Queer Appalachia on those chapters, And I did a documentary tour Transilient and talked to them for a long time afterwards, and just like helped with setup when I was along on it. I think you always have to give back to the people that you're working with to be able to have some sort of balance, to be able to show respect. I mean, I hope that just becomes a common courtesy in higher ed going forward. And while I think that there has been some evolution in academia, I think it's really important to have an archive of this. I am very curious if academia will actually really allow a good diversity of people into it one day. They can talk a game about it constantly. I just need to see it more in practice. And I say that as somebody who's been working in it since 2007 as an administrator onward, and now trying to get that job. I'm seeing consistent issues at all schools on this front. And I hope that they learn to embody DEI instead of just have departments for it. So.
So one thing we talk about in dance studies a lot is when people that like aren't of a culture that they're studying, they'll go and like hang out, you know what I mean? Like that typical sort of extractive story of just gathering knowledge and then leaving. And we get like, we bristle up immediately because people will like say they learned these dance forms and now they have like this sort of fancy knowledge of this rich, you know, practice. And I remember in class one day, one of my friends was like, wait, how long did she take that class? Because that is not long enough to be legit. So it's like there's this sort of like temporal thing of like, how long were you there? Like, what did you do? Like, were you engaging any way? Like Beck says, were you giving back? Were you participating? And like, what was your community work? Like, what were you doing for the community? And I think, so I didn't, like a dimension of my work is like looking at those sort of radical imaginings of folk dance. I'm not a folk dancer, but you know what? I'm taking classes with Carla Gover and it's hard and I look like an idiot, but you know what? I'm learning, and my goal is to like, you know, like we hang out, we learn, right? It's not to be a pro, but it's to like fully invest in this community. And like, I don't know, maybe I'll get up on stage one day and make a complete ass out of myself. But you know what? Like, it's part of the process, right? You have to fully invest and fully embody what you say you're doing. The other thing I wanted to say was, so I saw an interview once with Dr. Catherine McKittrick, who is brilliant. If you've not read any of her work, can recommend. And she said it's not her job to privilege either theory or sort of like a story or folk knowledge or whatever body of information she's accessing. It's not her job to privilege those. It's to say how they speak to each other. So I think about that a lot. Like, what does, I don't know, what does Foucault say to my mama? I don't know, like, do you know what I mean? And it's our job as scholars, as academics, to see how they're conversing with each other. So just to say that.
I think it's really funny because I'm so proud of the chapters and like the physical book, but what I'm almost more excited about is, like you were saying, the conversations, the entanglement, right? Like I look at the index and see bell hooks cited with like Appalachian poets, and that just makes me just feel good about being in conversation and who we're in conversation with, right? And I feel like the best thing about who you're citing, it shows what the genealogy of that is. And we're building this space and building upon this genealogy. And we've continued to grow from these projects, right? And collaborate together on other things and really create a queer Appalachian studies and a more Appalachian of our version of our own disciplines, right? And I'm so proud of that and of the dialogue that we've built and the community building, both from like the Marks in the Mountains page and other spaces too. You know, a part of that is in a very messy, queer way, not always positive, right? And so I think we've kind of talked a little bit about how this project's a little messy, and we talk a lot about being indebted to the queer Appalachian Instagram space and electric dirt. And a lot of viewers might not be as plugged in to these spaces. So I was hoping you all could talk a little bit about, what might have happened and when there was a Washington Post article that came out that kind of targeted queer Appalachia and really led to some very like visible conversations in our spaces and feelings of how to be accountable and worrying about like what grifting could look like and things that we're conscious of in this book and in our work.
I could also provide just a short overview of that too. Let's see, I believe that was August 3rd, 2020. The Washington Post magazine had an article called "The Tale of Queer Appalachia," and then I don't remember what the subtitle was, but "Do we know where the money's going?" was essentially it, and it was asking. The first part of the article was all being like, "We can't trace this money," by the author, and the second part was looking into the validity of the founder's career, which had been overblown, and then it caused a lot of us to question what have we been looking into, and I know a lot of really interesting and heartbreaking conversations were happening with people. And Zane, I don't know if I've ever thanked you enough for walking me through that, because I've been working with them so closely at the time that happened. I am definitely still going over this since I'm writing about it. Like it's a part of my dissertation. I have been living with it pretty consistently, and sometimes I have to walk away a little bit, because definitely working on this book with y'all, like it was a tremendous amount of growth for me, especially as that was something that was happening, and everybody was in a pressure cooker that summer. Like it was that the world had been flipped upside down in some good ways, in some really awful ways. And yeah, and then we watched the cancellation of Queer Appalachia, which clearly had a big influence on all of us. I would love to hear what other people have to say on it, because I was just in a whirlwind in August of 2020 and just trying to figure out where my head and my feet and I don't know. Yeah.
Sorry to be so, I feel very similarly. I mean, I'm sure everyone does, but I'll never forget that day. I believe I was just kind of out of lockdown-ish, like a very hardcore one in Israel, but it was very, very intense. And I remember I had been messaging Zane, and we had been working on this new activist Appalachian queer group. And then my friend in Germany sends me an article that sends me the article, and he's just like, "Matt, what is going on?" And I'm just like, "Oh my, we just got started, and now this is happening. It's like it's blowing up, and it's like we were so close, and here we go." But then it's like, back to the drawing board. So it's like, yeah, yeah. I remember watching all of those videos. I guess it was on TikTok, I think it was, or was it on or was it on YouTube? I can't remember. Yeah, I remember watching all of the expose and doing all the investigation. Yeah, I just remember it being a very intense time, and the feeling of having achieved so much and yet having it all just collapse and having achieved so little. So for me, it was very dramatic. I remember thinking it was like we were living in a movie at that moment somehow. So much attention on queer Appalachia yet again, and again going through the whole same old song and dance. Yeah, it was a very intense time. And I remember us having to kind of wrestle with how we're going to, deal with this and defining our own identity in this book. Because I think that we had a big debate about whether or not we should include it or not. And I think I was one of the ones who said, we should. And there were obviously other different opinions, of course. I think a lot of the chapters in the book deal with it in a pretty good way. But yeah, it was a very intense time, and it was certainly one of those milestones when I think about how the development of this book went. Probably one of the most defining ones.
I remember, I think Zane, you organized like an emergency Zoom or something. And like, I remember like actually seeing y'all's faces for the first time. And I was like, oh shit, you are real people. I mean, and I knew that you were, but then also this weird thing that we were just about to talk about, and like what our thoughts were. And like, I remember I literally was falling asleep. And sometimes I do the doom scroll, like trying to fall asleep because, I can't. And I was just like, wait, what's going on? And I remember reading the article, just like laying there in bed with my screen and just like, oh God, oh no. And then like the next day I wake up to like emails like, hey guys, we should talk about this. But I remember just feeling like, one, really disappointed, and like Matthew said, now we got to start over again. You know what I mean? Like, oh, scratch it, back to the board. But like, also feeling like I had found so much there, and it made me feel so comfortable with like who I was and how I identified and all of those things, that I was like, I felt betrayed, and like how could this have happened? And like these poor artists and other people that were like really affected, like me, it just kind of like made me sad and disappointed. It didn't affect my livelihood. And for me, it was about like, this affected people's like literal livelihoods. And I just couldn't get behind that. And I'll just conclude by saying, and we're still waiting for answers. We're still waiting for the information. I mean, maybe I missed it. Okay, no, okay.
Didn't, and I'm not sure we'll ever get more. I feel like that might have just been in the story. Like I've seen that all the stuff has been like Queer Appalachia, it's for sale, the domain name. And a lot of things have been, unless that changed in the course of the past month, I haven't checked. Okay, it's going for over 2,000. So, but also, who buys that? Yeah, so the website's down, and a lot of the controversy was deleted from the Instagram. So it just stands there as kind of an archive without that. And I think that maybe the idea now is for it to just blow over. But clearly it won't, because it started so many things.
I just wanted to add one thing to that. The very, very last thing I remember seeing from them was that page that said it had been was being decolonized or something to that effect. And then it just, I don't even know. Yeah, that was just my last memory. When you were talking about it, I was just thinking like that was my last recollection of anything from that end.
Zane, you might have even been closer to that project than I was, and I was spending a lot of time. I know that you, yeah, so.
It was very difficult for a lot of us, because we finally felt represented in a space, right? And we helped create that space. Most of Queer Appalachia's posts were from the community, right? And really not only inspired a lot of us, but then actually started getting a narrative of Queer Appalachia out there that we hadn't seen before. And people were really excited. And then really thinking through mutual aid and as it connected to queer politics and abolition, and focusing. The last thing they posted, because I knew this article was coming out, was kind of a bullshit land back thing to try to get people's eyes off of it. And they didn't warn any of us it was coming out. And not only, like, it harmed a lot of us, right? It harmed this book project. People ended up leaving because they felt like Queer Appalachia, even though we weren't really affiliated with the organization, that this was still something tangentially connected with the same words. People who had gotten grants and funds from Mamone and Chelsea suddenly had to answer for where their donations came from, and they were really doing really great direct action work. And a lot of the worlds we were dreaming, post-capitalism, abolition, queer ecology worlds in Appalachia, what that could look like, really, I think were broken down by that, because when you have a platform, you get power, and that just sometimes eclipses what's important. And then it really showed that no matter how much you can say you're anti-racist, a white queer is white first, right? And so that's something we have been really, I think Appalachian studies and queer Appalachian advocates and organizers really learned a lot from the Queer Appalachia project and its downfall. And one of the things, but even with that, right, as an archive, it was so important. And so people wrote it off right away because it had been harmful, and it harmed tons and tons of people, specifically like queer and trans Black people in Appalachia. But people just wanted to distance themselves as far as possible to not be further damaged by that. But there was a lot of power and good and community in that. And even though it was, because our book was actually finished, the manuscript was done, and Mamone and Chelsea had a few chapters in it. And then this news came out like right before the manuscript was due. And so when they're talking through the emergency Zoom, it was, what do we do about this? And it really came down to, they had done a survey, Queer Appalachia had, but didn't show us wouldn't evidence where their data was from. And so we were trying to really about like the opioid epidemic, because that was something Mamone was very passionate about and really important. With queer organizing is it's creating recovery spaces or thinking through safe injection spaces and harm reduction in a way that isn't religious and isn't homophobic and transphobic like many spaces are. But they couldn't show us where their data was, and so we ended up worrying about providing a larger platform for them. So we dropped their chapters, and then people dropped out of the project because, even despite that, just because it might have been ever connected to Queer Appalachia. But just even with that, we solicited more chapters. We asked for people to respond to what happened, to raise their voices. We invited one of my friends, Maxwell, who is actually archiving all of the Queer Appalachia project, because it could just be deleted tomorrow. I mean, when people were getting called out, Mamone and Chelsea went and deleted posts, right? And those posts were really important for queer archiving. And so there's a chapter in our book saying, you know, what do we learn from the failure of Queer Appalachia, and how can it still be valued as an archive, which I find as extremely important even 2 years later. So but yeah, it's messy, but it's fun. And I feel like people in the know that history, but in a lot of ways, like you said, Beck, Mamone and Chelsea just disappeared, and there wasn't really that accountability and responsiveness to the harm they had done. And I mean, Queer Appalachia, the Instagram page, didn't lose a ton of followers, you know, even though it hasn't moved in 2 years. And even though last I heard that, even though they had said they had decolonized, we're going to deplatform and give it to Black organizers in West Virginia, that they end up getting the password and locking them out, and it's not moving to Instagram again. So there's still a lot of trauma there that has affected this book, and I think continues to affect the work that we do. But despite that, I think that is really powerful how we were able to come together after that and try to be accountable and think through what a platform could look like and what queer organizing could look like after the fall of what we thought Queer Appalachia was to us.
You did something Herculean there. Like, I will always be impressed. And then, like, how many other books were you juggling at the same time? I was just like, I just don't know if you sleep. But yeah, it was tremendous. And also to continue to keep a nice sense of community when things were going so poorly with Queer Appalachia was really remarkable. So thank you again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you know, being able to have all these voices in conversation in and of itself, like in this book, is a testament, I think, to how far we've gone, right? To be able to get this published. Like, it was really difficult to get this published. We had gotten dropped from multiple contracts, you know, because queer, trans, Appalachian voices don't have platforms, right? And so this book really is a testament to the work in the community, building an advocacy that we created and have done. And I think because of that, we're seeing, like I said, this space for queer Appalachian voices. You know, you have Nima's book that has come out. You have other queer Appalachian books coming out. You had at Appalachian Studies Association tons and tons of queer organizing and different roundtables on what queer Appalachia could look like. We have a special issue of the Journal of Appalachian Studies coming out, I think, next month, on queer Appalachian futures. We have, I have another book that's going under peer review with the University of Kentucky Press on queer ecologies in Appalachia. And, you know, as a white settler, what does it mean to even try to say a space is queer, right? As a form of settler colonialism, and really thinking through the way white supremacy and colonialism operates within queer spaces, which is a lot of the work because of what happened with queer Appalachia that we have to be conscious of and really use our whiteness and our platform that we were able to fight for to uplift other voices that also are facing these issues. So we have about 10 minutes left. I just want to remind everyone that, you know, please send us questions if you have anything you want to ask any of our great contributors. We've talked a little bit about your chapters, but haven't really gotten into the depth. I would like, unless we get any other questions, I'd love to hear just kind of your summary of the chapter that you've done.
Sure. So one of the things that I did, as I was mentioning, it was a comprehensive exam qualifying thing, transgender studies, Appalachian studies, and both of these go through media cycles. Trans isn't new. We can go back, Christine Jurgensen, we can go back further. It always gets picked up time and time again and looked at as this whole new object. How curious is that? But so does Appalachia. So the two of them just fit so well together when I was looking at things like media representation, the ways people perceive bodies, the way people look at time. Like people would say, oh, Appalachia's backwards, but also we can say it's gone to late stages of capitalism over and over again. And when we look at trans, some people are just like, oh, they're so traditional that they have to like live in a binary. This is one, and another one is like they're too far advanced. But it's just phenomenal how well the two go together. And I really just wish that more people in the region saw that, because what's happening with them is very much seems like a partnership that should develop. And if somebody could read that and be like, hey, this fits me, that would be wonderful. So that was the full.
I can go. So I guess the big takeaway from my chapter is this concept of plant time. The last talk we did, I said, so plants are gay, which we were going to turn into a t-shirt. But so in all seriousness though, I think what Zane said about this concept of like queer studies taking up a lot of, no, I guess it's more like whiteness and white supremacy is taking up a lot of space in queer studies. I think the shift from queer time to plant time is sort of trying to challenge that, or at least that's what I'm writing about currently. So thinking about looking at indigenous practices and like Black farming practices that are already suggesting this, right? So those worlds are already very queer, like queer according to what? According to whom? Who is this queer in conversation with? So I think it's in an effort to sort of shift that power balance a little is what I'm kind of thinking of right now. But anyway, so this concept of plant time is taking our sort of understanding of the subtleties of how things grow and how those things can be nurtured and cared for that are literally like a glitch in like the racial capitalism machine. Like it's literally not that. It's a completely separate system. So I think for me, that was like the first time, my chapter was the first time that I started to sort of understand that, or at least try to grab at it. You know, it feels a little more clear to, you know, as clear as a dissertation in the works can be, but it was the first time that I was like, wait, I think there's something different here. Like, yeah, queer time. Yeah, cool. All right. Munoz, straight time, queer time. Cool. You know, it feels a little 2009 at this point, but it's also like, cool, that helps me get to this other moment. So I have to cite it because that's how I got there. But like, this thing is trying to do something else. Like it's allowing us that something else. So check out your plans.
Okay, so I guess it's my turn. Well, my chapter is a little bit strange, and quite frankly, I think it's probably the least interesting of Beck's and Kendall's. But basically, I was trying to do three things. Okay, on the one hand, I was trying to get specifically queer Appalachians to rethink the concept of heritage, and specifically oral heritage, and what that means and what that can mean for them. And future, in the future, the next generation and even down, because on one level, the second level is creating an archive. On the third level, it was pure anthropology, because basically I had heard all these stories of basically male witches in my county and midwives and how they had lived and in semi-regular. Then I realized, oh, holy crap, some of these people lived until like the 1970s, and started thinking about what that means and how that can, you know, informed me and how other such narratives and not only that, but kind of the oral heritage and the oral traditions that we carry on in Appalachia, and especially in like the southeastern Kentucky mountains, can inform and are carried on by queers, and what that means for place making and finding a place for them, and in general, kind of I guess making the place, I think it certainly has an impact on making queers feel more comfortable in the region, defining the Self. So on one hand, it was extremely like hardcore anthro. On the other hand, it was kind of meta and theoretical. But I think that's it in a nutshell. I think the most interesting parts about the male witches and stuff, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Then you made that into your own, like an own article, right, Matt?
Oh yeah. It was.
You started with that, and I was like, let's try something different. Because I'm a very like hands-in editor. I'm kind of annoying as an editor, but I feel like I'm always very focused on tone and putting pieces in conversation with each other. I feel like when we think through what queer Appalachia is in both our chapters and as disciplines and our identities, we keep coming back to this idea of destabilizing normative time, destabilizing normative understandings of the body and destabilizing hierarchical power, right? And I feel like a lot of our work, even though it's deeply personal and interpersonal and community-based and at the same time theoretical, it has a lot to say about contemporary material conditions, right? And contemporary political landscape. And we have just a few minutes, but we had a question from the audience about how do you think this book will provide critical context for speaking back to the iconography of hillbilly that is playing out in the current US Senate race in Ohio? And I think I want to keep that in there, but then think through all the anti-trans legislation, the potential Roe v. Wade overturning and how that'll affect Appalachians. What does our idea of queerness, of Appalachianness, of the political implications of that mean to our current hellscape of legislation and litigation? And what can theory and identity really do to kind of combat this?
So I guess I'll jump in because I feel like somebody I know asked that question because I'm from Ohio. So I feel like that was a setup for me or something. Like, oh God, Ohio friends. Oh, we need to be very loud in our disgruntledness. But as far as like what this text does, okay, so I'll start with a small story because I know I'm being aware of the time. Capitalist time. No, it's fine. I'm just kidding. So I was home for a visit recently, and some of my friends contacted me because they were concerned because my high school's graduation the day before, the nominated speaker, was a community member, had gone on a small anti-gay, super homophobic, super transphobic speech to congratulate the graduating class. So I'd like to say that that's not the climate in Ohio, but it is. It's the one you kind of hear about a lot. But also the graduating class is super queer and super ally based. So it's like, we don't hear those stories. And that's kind of like on purpose. I think there's a reason that we just hear the negative things, right? With that said, I was like, hey, how do we get a copy of this in my high school's library? How do we get a copy of this text in my high school's library? Because what it does is like, it gives like maybe not, homeboy giving the speech any information, but it gives the younger folks that there's others, there's more of us here, we're here. And it sort of takes a step to establish that community that sometimes doesn't look like it does, in those sort of metronormative ways, right? Queer looks different in the country, I think. And it's like for younger folks to know that getting involved with political communities and other people like them, that we're here and we're available, and we just need to get kind of loud.
This book just adds to a culture of care that we're providing that, and I think that is just within itself huge. Whatever happens out of that, whatever ripples, somebody can pick this up from wherever and be like, okay, somewhere in that story, somebody who's a little queer Appalachian, somebody who's an older queer Appalachian might find some comfort. So.
So I agree with everything that everyone said. I do think that I can speak a little bit from perhaps a very uniquely Southeastern Appalachian perspective to what might. I can give you the current a brief overview of the current climate in which this Roe versus Wade debate is entering. So one of my cousins actually is very involved in writing about women's health in the state of Kentucky, and I believe as of 2022. There is 2 abortion clinics in the state of Kentucky. One of them was Planned Parenthood. The other one is very recent, and I think it only opened either this year in 2021. And then there's prior to that there was just one in the whole state, and she's wrote about this a bit. So in my county was actually kind of it pretty much exists in a modern sense because of, I guess you could say, I mean the advancement of science, and specifically, I guess like not necessarily fertility, but delivering babies, pediatrics, and midwifery and stuff like that, like Mary Breckenridge. So while this institution is kind of closing shop and stopping to provide women's services in my extremely rural county, not only do you have the Roe versus Wade stuff, but also infant mortality is going up specifically. Yeah, so it's gonna be a gigantic mess in terms of care given on all fronts. So I don't know. I mean, I don't really have the answers exactly, but I can tell you that's kind of the climate that's emerging. And if anyone's interested in knowing a bit more about these situations, I can refer you to some of my cousin's work, also some very good books about the history of Mary Breckenridge and the Frontier Nursing Service. And but yeah, I can tell you that I think that, but back to the original point, I think that just simply being aware that queers exist and being aware that these issues exist and these people exist that can make these changes happen and have this kind, again, like this culture of care, I think is key as always. So I think that that's what we've got to get back towards, and I think our book can definitely help towards that.
I think what we were all really speaking to, right, is archiving as a form of advocacy. Whose stories are told, whose voices do we see represented, and how that affects the way we see a region, right? Because it's not like queer and trans organizing doesn't happen in the South and in Appalachia. West Virginia has the highest percentage of trans youth. It's what stories we're told about ourselves, and that really isolates us. And so, building networks, building communities, building archives, and really being able to create space for each other, for me, is really important. And that's what this event's about. That's what this book's about. And so I thank you all for, being here and creating the space with us today as a form of direct action, really, for me.
Hi, I want to give all of you a little more space to say any final words. I just wanted to jump in and thank you again, since we're right at 7:00, and thank you so much for everything that you've shared and discussed with us this evening. But I don't want to have anyone leaving feeling like they've left something super important unsaid. So we can take one more minute if you'd like. Beck, Kendall, and Matthew.
I feel like I could talk to these people forever. So it's just nice to be in the room with you all, the Zoom rooms with you. And I appreciate being able to get this time. So thanks to you, Stephanie, and Malaprops.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say quickly, yes, love you all. Stephanie, thank you. And just to whomever is listening, like, show up for your people. Like, we're all stretched thin and we're all pretty maxed out in all kinds of ways, but like, just take a second and, maybe check on your friends, or maybe somebody, just offer some help. Maybe just hey, how's it going? Just anything, just offer a little extra care to the people around you.
You're all wonderful. Thank you so much. It was a beautiful night. I really loved it. I could do it all day, like Beck said. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Yeah, that was really nice, Kendall. Yeah, look, check on your friends, stay there for people, and keep Appalachia queer. Keep Appalachia queer, and yeah.
Thank you all so much again. We appreciate you and appreciate everyone who's been with us. And we hope that you all stay safe and well until we have another opportunity. Thank you all again.